Hello there, friends. Hanging out in the backyard today, and I figured I'd share a new article with you. This is from HBR series on dealing with difficult people. In this article, written by Amy Gallo, she's going to talk to us, share a few tips and advice on how to deal with a mean colleague, bad behavior in the workplace, and that can certainly get under anyone's skin and make things very difficult to deal with in a professional setting. The way Amy has set this article up is that she first goes through some tips and advice and a little bit of information and background for your understanding. Briefly, she shares a few do's and don'ts, and then she shares a few case studies at the end, 2 in this case. As always, let me share a little bit about Amy first, and then we'll jump right into the article. Amy Gallo is a contributing editor at Harvard Business Review and the author of HBR Guide to Dealing with Conflict, which was published by HBR Press in 2017. She writes and speaks about workplace dynamics. See her website amyegallo.com and follow her on Twitter, now X, at Amy E. Gallo. This is from 2017, so I imagine her biography has many more accolades and accomplishments now. In any case, let's jump into some of these tips and tricks that Amy shares about how to deal with a mean colleague. When a colleague is mean to you, she says, it can be hard to know how to respond. Some people are tempted to let aggressive behavior slide in the hopes that the other person will stop. Others will find themselves fighting back. When you are being treated poorly by a coworker, how can you change this dynamic? And if this behavior persists, or even worse, gets more aggressive over time, how do you know when you're dealing with a true bully? When it comes to bad behavior at work, there's a broad spectrum, with outright bullies on one end and people who are simply rude on the other, says Michelle Woodward, an executive coach and host of HBR's webinar called Bullies, Jerks, and Other Annoyances: Identify and Diffuse the Difficult People at Work. Now, you may not know which end of the spectrum you're dealing with until you actually address the behavior. If it's a bully, it can be difficult, if not outright impossible, to get that person to change their behavior, says Gary Namey, founder of the Workplace Bullying Institute and author of The Bully at Work. But in most cases, you can and should take action. Know that you have a solution. You are not powerless. There are things that you can do, says Woodward. Here are some tactics to consider when dealing with an aggressive colleague. There are 5 pieces of advice that are shared, and then we'll jump into the do's and don'ts and the case studies. So the first tactic, or the first thing that you need to know, is to understand why this person is behaving in this way. This is the first step, and it's fundamental. Once you understand why a person is behaving this way, you understand what is causing this behavior. Research that they reference from Nathaniel Fast, an assistant professor at the University of Southern California's Marshall School of Business, he proves a commonly held idea. People act out when their ego is threatened. We often see powerful people behave aggressively towards less powerful people when their competence is questioned, he says. And Namey agrees, Gary Namey, who I referenced earlier. People who are skilled and well-liked are the most frequent targets precisely because they pose a threat. So you have to kind of flip it. You have to see it from the other person's perspective, that they might not be comfortable at all about, the up and coming star, as it were, that's well liked, everyone recognizes them as competent, and from their perspective, when there are trouble, or when there are troubles, or when people need advice on what they should do, rather than going to the boss or the supervisor or the superior, they now go to someone else. That person no longer feels competent, no longer feels as skilled. They've gone to second rung, as it were. So that's something to consider as to why that person might be acting out in this way. So they share one tactic, and of course not all people will like this, will like to hear it. One tactic is to help this is to stroke their ego. In our study, we saw that if the subordinate offered gratitude to the boss, so in fact you don't even have to praise them, or you don't have to put what we typically think of as stroking someone else's ego and flattering them, but simple gratitude itself is a great tip here. Even a small gesture can wipe out this effect. Fast explains. Just sending a brief email saying, "Thanks so much for your help," or complimenting the person about something you genuinely admire. This can really help tone down that behavior. They reference an article for this, and I'll share that reference with you. So if you want, you can go and look at that as well, because it is quite interesting. The reference is by N.J. Fast and S. Chen, and the title of that article, in fact there are two articles, both from Psychological Science. The first article by N.J. Fast and S. Chen is "When the Boss Feels Inadequate: Power, Incompetence, and Aggression." And the second article that they reference is "A Simple Thanks Can Tame the Barking Boss." And both of those are from Psychological Science. So go there and have a read to learn more about that. The second tactic that they share, second strategy, is look at what you're doing. These situations, like many situations that pose difficulty in the workplace, require introspection. It's very easy to say, "Oh, that person is a jerk," Woodward says. But perhaps you work in a highly competitive culture, or one that doesn't necessarily prioritize politeness. Consider whether you might be misinterpreting their behavior or overreacting to it, or whether you unknowingly have already contributed to the problem. Have you in any way caused the other person to feel threatened or to see you as disloyal? Self-evaluation can indeed be tough. So sometimes the best thing to do is go to someone else. Get a second opinion from someone that you trust, who will tell you the truth, not just someone who will tell you what you want to hear. Find the right people. There are some people who, they have a lot of empathy and sympathy for the other people. They have a way of understanding how to give someone what they want in terms of compassion. But what you need in a situation like this is someone who's going to tell you the truth. So find the right people for the right job in professional and performance matters, but also in terms of what you need emotionally in the office. Don't put too much of the blame on yourself, however. It's important to balance not being threatening with not being a doormat, which just invites more aggression from the person. Targets regularly assume that it's their fault that they're being targeted, when it's not. It's not your fault, but it does require understanding of the other person and also introspection and evaluation of yourself from an outside party. The third tactic, strategy, is stand up for yourself. Don't be afraid to call out the bad behavior when it happens. I believe very strongly in making immediate corrections, said Woodward. If someone calls you honey in a meeting, say right then, I don't like being called that, please use my name. Right? Just be direct, and as soon as the mistake occurred, especially if it's in public. If it's in public, make sure that everyone hears that a correction has been made, that you're not accepting that sort of behavior. If, however, you're very uncomfortable or it's in a situation where you don't necessarily want to do that, maybe you're, I don't know, in front of clients or in some other situation where it wouldn't be appropriate to speak up, then make sure the first opportunity you get outside of the meeting, when you can discuss that, go up to them and speak about it. Say, I didn't like being called honey, this demeans me, this is inappropriate behavior, do not do that ever again. Show that there is no reward for treating you in this way. The message should be, don't mess with me, it won't be worth your effort. The next piece of advice, enlist help from others. Everyone should have alliances at work. Peers, people above you, people below you, people who can be your advocates when you're not there, people who can be your champions, says Woodward. Talk to these supporters and see what they can do to help, whether it's simply confirming your perspective, if you just need someone to talk to, or if you need someone that's actually going to speak on your behalf. Make sure you have friends or allies throughout the ranks of your company. Have good relationships with the people that you work with. Now, of course, you may need to escalate the situation to someone more senior. But before that, you owe it to the relationship to try to solve it informally. That will help build your relationship a little bit more over time rather than immediately escalating. Another thing I'll add, and it's not in this book, it's from a separate set of articles that I've been reading, is that when you do need to escalate, many people, they will go privately to HR or to the boss or to the manager and escalate unilaterally. And I've often heard that that creates its own set of problems because your boss or HR or whoever is only hearing one side of the story and it's only hearing your side of the story, and there's no way for them to make a good decision. If they are, short on time, they may just take your word for it or take the other person's word for it and just make a decision and be on with it and not really resolve the problem. So when you do have to escalate to a boss, sometimes the best thing to do is to jointly escalate. Grab the person that you have a problem with and together go to HR or the boss or the manager or supervisor or whoever, and both of you can speak together at the same time and actually produce a resolution. Escalation is, the purpose of escalation is not to just punish the other person. The purpose of escalation is so that you can get some sort of resolution, and sometimes doing it jointly is the correct way to do it. So anyway, going back to this article, you owe it to your relationship with the person that you're having difficulty with it to try, at least make the attempt to solve it informally before you resort to escalating it. When you do eventually escalate though, and in fact, this conversation can also happen directly with that person that you're having trouble with. You have to demonstrate the cost to the business. If you do not need to take formal action, start with your boss, assuming he is not the aggressor himself. You may need to take the issue higher up the hierarchy. And when you have someone's ear, NAMI recommends focusing on the conversation on how the person's behavior is hurting the business. How is this affecting the bottom line, or how is this making the business less efficient? Talk about morale. Talk about performance. Personal pleas, emotional pleas rarely work, and they often degenerate into the he said, she said sort of argument. Don't tell a story about your emotional wounds. Make an argument that the person is costing the business money, or if it's not a business, costing the organization money or effort or time. Know the limitations. When none of the above works for you, you have to consider, is this uncivil, mean behavior, or am I being bullied? If you are in an abusive situation, not just a tough one, like genuinely an abusive situation, Namey and Woodward agree that chances of change are low, slim to none. There's no people who have this sort of behavior, they tend to be fixed in their ways. You're not going to change them. The only time I've seen a bully change is when they are publicly fired. Sanctions don't work, says Woodward. Instead, you need to take action to protect yourself. Of course, in an ideal world, senior leaders would immediately fire people who are toxic to a workplace. But both Namey and Woodward agree that it rarely happens. Even though the statistics are clear on the impact of bullying on morale, retention, and performance, it's very hard for organizations to take action. It's not willing to do it. And I have seen it in several companies that I've worked at previously. There's a great resistance to firing people and hiring anew. There's so much effort and struggle that goes into the hiring and firing process. So as a result, many companies are very hesitant to get into it. If you're in an abusive situation at work, the most tenable solution may actually be to leave, if that's a possibility. The Workplace Bullying Institute has done online surveys that show people stay in a bullying situation often because of pride, more so than because of economics. So it's not really the money that's keeping you to the job. Sometimes people actually want to stick it to the bully and get through it. They don't want to let the bully win. So if you're worried about letting the bully win, Namey says, you're better off worrying about your own well-being. Take that into greater account. And Namey references an article that he uses for worrying about your own well-being rather than taking on the bully. And what he references is WBI, that's the Workplace Bullying Institute. They conducted a survey in 2014, the Workplace Bullying Survey. And in it, they found that 40% of respondents said that they stick into a situation out of pride, show that they are not going to take it from the bully, more than the 38%, and arguably it's true, 40% and 38% are very close. 38% of who will stay because of economics, and many times that's often what is referenced as, I can't leave my job because of economics, but actually it's most often pride. So in conclusion of that section, worry about your own well-being. Don't worry about sticking it to the bully. If it's really having a bad impact on you, get out of the situation. A few do's and don'ts for you to consider. 3 do's and 3 don'ts. Number 1, do know that people act aggressively at work because they feel threatened. So be aware of that. Number 2, do ask yourself whether you're being overly sensitive or you're misinterpreting the situation. Find people that you can trust and speak to them about it. Number 3, do call out the inappropriate behavior in the moment. The instant it happens, call it out. And if it is in public, call it out so that others hear as well. When other people hear this, they will also have the strength to resist inappropriate behavior or mean behavior in the professional workplace. And they'll know that you're not going to stand for it, and they will stand up for you in the future. It creates a better culture when you're dealing with these sorts of behaviors. Now, 3 don'ts to share. Number 1, don't take the blame. Many bullies pick targets that are highly skilled and well liked. So just be aware of that. You may be getting targeted because you are good at what you are doing. Number 2, don't escalate the situation until you've tried to resolve it informally and with the help of your allies. So try to resolve. If you cannot, then ultimately you may have to escalate to up the hierarchy. And number 3, don't suffer unnecessarily. If the situation persists, then you can leave. Do it. Get out of there. Now, a few case studies that Amy shares to wrap up this article. Case study number 1, don't stay and suffer. 11 years ago, Heather Reynolds took a new position at a veterinary clinic owned by another veterinarian named Adam, with the intention of buying into the practice. Names and details in these case studies have been changed, of course. At first, Adam seemed thrilled about Heather coming to work for him. He was positive, supportive, and encouraging. He was over the moon about me joining, she says. After several months, she bought half of the firm and became Adam's business partner. Things continued to go well until about a year later when, after what seemed like a minor disagreement to Heather, Adam stopped speaking to Heather for 6 weeks. When she confronted him, he told her he was considering dropping her as a partner. Heather was shocked. She had taken out a loan to buy into the firm and she felt really stuck. Now, eventually, they got back on track, but Heather soon learned that this was a pattern of behavior. Anytime there was conflict, Adam reacted the same way. If I disagreed, he would ice me out. She eventually figured out that stroking his ego was more effective. You could, flatter him and tell him how great he was and how well he did in a particular case, and then he'd be back on your side. And she learned to do this sort of dance in order to survive the company, but that's not a healthy relationship. Adam's harsh behavior took its toll on Heather. Last year, she says, things got so bad that he didn't speak to me for 3 months. Heather soon sought the advice of a professional coach who helped her see that Adam was a narcissist and a bully who was threatened by her skills. Late last year, she told him she was looking for someone to buy out her part of the business, and he offered to do it. It was the best thing I could have done, she says. I wish I'd left when he first showed me who he truly was. So good on her. I have also in the past been in similar situations where you have a conflict with a senior, a colleague, etc., and they don't know how to have a healthy conflict. They don't know how to resolve things. They don't know how to debate things. Things get too emotionally charged and they ice you out completely. And that's so unfortunate, because rather than it being a simple resolution, it goes on way too long and it really destroys whatever relationship that you had with that person. Case study number 2 now. Call out the bad behavior. Christine Johnson was excited about her new role as deputy editor at a San Francisco-based media company. The position just been created, so she would be managing a team of existing staff, and everyone welcomed her except for one person, Terry. Now, what she didn't know and what she later learned was that he wanted the role, and he was very angry that he didn't get it. During her first weeks on the job, Terry was aggressive. I was constantly fending off little attacks from him, she remembers. He kept asking her how she wanted to supervise their work, what processes she wanted to put in place, how he should interact with her about his projects. Looking back, Heather realizes that these were all questions designed specifically to make her look unprepared and incompetent. And she was too green, too new to the role, to say, that she didn't know yet or know how to deal with it. Terry then took it up a notch. He started sending Christine 50 emails with return receipts before 9 a.m. When she hadn't responded by 11 a.m., he would start emailing her to ask her if she'd seen the emails. It's a very aggressive behavior there in the office. He was constantly badgering me. I actually considered quitting. I didn't feel like I had any allies and wasn't sure this was the job that I wanted. Keep in mind, this is a new role for her, so she hasn't yet built relationships with others in the office. And she's having this sort of difficulty with one employee. After 5 weeks, so consider she bore this toxic behavior for 5 weeks. After 5 weeks of this abuse, Christine stood up to Terry in a staff meeting. He just kept asking me questions over and over, and I just lost my cool, she says. She snapped at Terry and said, "I'm sick of you asking me so many unnecessary questions. Can you please stop?" And Terry backed down. Christine was really embarrassed about this behavior. But later, when she was in her office, people began stopping by to thank her for standing up to Terry. Once I had a small amount of reinforcement from my peers, I knew that I could take him on. And once he saw that she wasn't willing to take this sort of abuse, he stood down. It got better and we were cordial, but it was an awful start at that company. That concludes the second case study and ultimately concludes this article. Hopefully you're able to learn something and gain some advice, some tactics, some strategies on how to deal with a mean person in the office. Thank you.